Pretend you're ill, and leave now." The words came low and fast against Verity Crew's ear, warm as the August air pressing through the open windows, and for one absurd moment she thought the Duke of Elsmere was flirting with her. Then she saw his face, and the moment broke. He was not flirting. He was a tall man gone suddenly white about the mouth, his broad shoulders angled to put himself between her and the drawing-room door, and his hand had closed on the back of a gilt chair, as though the chair alone were holding the both of them upright. "Faint, swoon, clutch your stomach, I don't care which," he murmured, smiling all the while at a point above her head in case anyone was watching through the glass. "Only go. Now through the garden door. And do not let the footman announce you." "Your Grace," Verity said, "I have come a very long way to put a small box into your hands, and I am not going to drop into a fit on your carpet to spare you whatever this is." "Whatever this is," he repeated, and laughed once, a short, despairing sound. "Madam, you have no idea what this is." She did, in fact, have a fair idea, because Verity Crew made her living by noticing things and saying almost none of them aloud. She had noticed, on being shown into this long gold room a quarter of an hour ago, that there were 2 cups laid for tea, and only 1 chair drawn close to the cold hearth, a room arranged for a meeting that had not yet begun. She had noticed the Duke's coat was buttoned wrong by a single button, the error of a man who had dressed himself in a hurry, and dismissed his man before the looking-glass could correct him. And she had noticed, just now, the carriage wheels grinding to a stop in the square below, and the way his head had turned toward the sound like a hare's. "You are expecting someone," she said. "I am expecting catastrophe." He took the velvet box from her hands at last, her father's box, the one she had carried wrapped against her ribs the whole jolting way from Clerkenwell, and he did not so much as glance at it. He set it on the mantel behind a clock and turned back to her, and this close she could smell sandalwood and the faint hot scent of a man who had been pacing. "What is your name?" "Crew, Miss Verity Crew. My father painted the miniature your mother commissioned, and since he is gone I have finished it, and I have brought it, and now I should like to be paid and to leave, which I find we are at last in perfect agreement upon. My mother." He shut his eyes. "You have come from my mother. I have come from a workroom that smells of turpentine, and a landlord who smells of gin, Your Grace. And I came because the Dowager Duchess of Elsmere wrote 3 letters in a hand, like a cavalry charge, demanding her late husband's likeness before the month was out." Verity tilted her head. She did not mention that delivering it would require theatrics. Somewhere below, a door opened. A voice carried up the staircase. A woman's voice, rich and unhurried, and entirely accustomed to being obeyed, saying something to a servant about the heat, and the windows, and whether his Grace was at home. The Duke's whole body changed. Verity, who had spent 10 years watching her father's sitters compose their faces for posterity, had never seen a face composed so fast over so much. The despair went somewhere underneath. What came up over it was charm, easy, golden, ruinous charm, the smile of a man who has talked his way out of every room he was ever cornered in. "Miss Crew," he said, "pitched now for carrying. You are far too kind to wait." "Banks will see you. 5 minutes," Verity said. "I beg your pardon? You whispered that I should pretend to be ill and leave, and that was rather less than a minute ago, and your mother is already on the stair. I cannot reach a garden door I have never seen, past a footman who has my shawl, in 5 minutes, let alone in 1. So, she folded her gloved hands. "I am afraid we are both going to have to stand here and be caught." For one breath he looked at her with something that was almost respect. Then the drawing-room door opened, and the 5 minutes were up, and the Dowager Duchess of Elsmere walked in. She was a handsome woman of perhaps 50, built on the same generous lines as her son, with silver threaded through dark hair, and a face that had clearly been a great beauty, and had decided not to apologize for the years since. She wore lavender silk despite the heat, and she came 3 steps into the room with the serene momentum of a frigate under full sail, before she saw that her son was not alone. She stopped. Her gaze went to Verity. It travelled, swift and complete, from Verity's plain straw bonnet to her ink-stained gloves to the hem of her grey gown, which had been good 4 summers ago and had been turned twice since. It was the look of a woman pricing a thing she had not expected to find in her drawing-room, and Verity felt her chin come up of its own accord, the old reflex of the poor and proud. "Tristan," said the Dowager Duchess. "Mama." The Duke's voice was a marvel of warmth. "You are early. I am exactly on time. You said 3. Her eyes had not left Verity. "I see you have already begun without me." "Begun? You need not look so stricken, my dear boy. I am delighted." The Dowager crossed the room, and her voice did a remarkable thing. It softened. It warmed. It opened like a hand. I had quite resigned myself to being made to wait until the dinner. And here she is in my own drawing-room, brave girl, in this dreadful heat. She stopped before Verity and looked at her, and there were, astonishingly, tears standing bright in her dark eyes. "You came. He swore you would not, that you valued your privacy above any wish of mine, and here you are." Verity stood very still. Something was happening that she did not understand, and a lifetime of standing in other people's grand houses had taught her that the most dangerous thing she could do was speak before she understood it. "Your Grace," she managed. "None of that." The Dowager took Verity's stained glove in both her own ringed hands and pressed it, and her grip was warm and surprisingly strong. "You will call me Mama soon enough, I hope, though I shall not press you. Tristan has told me so little. Wicked of him, keeping you to himself all these weeks. But he has told me enough." Over the Dowager's silver head, Verity met the Duke's eyes. She had never in her life seen a man so silently, completely, magnificently appalled. He had gone white again beneath the charm, and his hand had found his signet ring and was turning it round and round his finger, and he was looking at Verity with the particular horror of a man watching a fire reach the powder. All these weeks, Verity thought, he has told her enough. And she understood, all at once and far too late, exactly what this was. "He has told me." The Dowager went on, drawing Verity toward the cold hearth and the single drawn-up chair as if she was something precious that must be seated at once, "that you are clever, and that you are not of the ton, and that you would not have him for his title. Which, my dear, is the only recommendation in the world I require. For I married his father for a snuff-box and a way he had of laughing, and never once for Elsmere, whatever the cats of this town will tell you." She pressed Verity into the chair. "I have wanted to meet the woman my son means to marry for 2 months. And he has hidden you like a guilty secret." The word marry landed in the room and sat there. Verity's hands were quite cold inside her ruined gloves. She looked at the 2 teacups laid out. 2. She had counted them. A room arranged for a meeting, and she understood that the meeting had never been the Duke and his mother at all. The Dowager had come to meet a woman. A particular woman. The woman her son had invented to keep his mother from marrying him off, and had described, fool that he was, as clever and poor and indifferent to his rank, as if he had reached into a drawing-room he had not yet entered and sketched, without knowing it, the exact shape of Verity Crew. "Mama," the Duke said. "A word. In a moment. Now, I think." Tristan, the Dowager, did not turn round. Her eyes were on Verity, soft and shining and terrible. "I have waited 2 months. You will not deny me 2 minutes more. Sit. Ring for fresh tea. And let me look at her." He sat. Verity watched a duke fold himself into a chair he plainly did not wish to occupy, in a room he plainly wished to flee, because his mother had told him to, and despite everything, despite the trap closing its bright teeth around her ankle, some dry and disloyal part of her wanted to laugh. She did not laugh. She had learned long ago what laughter cost when you could not afford the consequences. "I do not know what to call you," the Dowager said to her, gently. "He would not even give me your name. Will you give it to me yourself?" And there it was, the precipice, with the whole drop visible below it, One word would end it. He invented me, Your Grace. I am a painter's daughter come to deliver a box and be paid 8 guineas, and your son has never courted anyone in his life but the avoidance of you. One word, and the Duke would be exposed as a liar to his mother, and Verity would be exposed as a young woman found alone with a Duke who had no claim on her. And a young woman so found did not go home to Clerkenwell and her landlord and her father's cooling trade with her name intact. She went home ruined, and ruin, for a woman who lived by her hands and her reputation both, was not a romantic word. It was a closed door, and another, until there were no doors left. She looked at the Duke. He was looking at her with naked dread, yes, but underneath the dread, for the first time, she saw him asking. Not commanding, not whispering orders against her ear, asking, please. The most expensive word a proud man owns, spent silent, across a cold hearth, on a stranger. Crew, Verity heard herself say. Verity Crew. Verity, the Dowager tasted it like wine. Truth, oh, that is well. That is very well. A man who has spent his life among flatterers should marry truth, and have done. She laughed, delighted, and pressed Verity's hand again. You are frightened of me. You needn't be. I am only a tiresome old woman who wants her son settled before the leaves turn, and who has been sick to her soul that he would choose some painted creature off the marriage mart, who wanted his houses and not his heart. And instead he has chosen this. Her gaze swept Verity once more. The bonnet, the gloves, that turned him, and this time there was no pricing in it at all, only a fierce and frightening tenderness. A girl who came across half of London in this heat to put a box in his hands and ask nothing for herself. I could weep. She was, in fact, weeping, just a little, with great dignity, blotting it with a lavender handkerchief. Verity sat with her spine straight, and her ruined gloves folded, and her heart going like a watch wound too tight, and thought, I have told one lie, the smallest lie in the world, my own true name, and I will never be able to take it back. Now, said the Dowager Duchess, brisk again, restored, putting the handkerchief away. You will both dine here on Thursday. Family only. My sister Augusta, who is poisoned but must be managed, and the Daundry girl, whom I had meant for you, Tristan, and who must be told kindly, and at once before the whole town does it cruelly. Lady Sybil is a sweet child, and the Marquess of Daundry's only daughter, and she does not deserve to learn she has been jilted from a gossip column. She rose. Verity will sit at my right hand. Verity, you will wear something I shall send you, and you will not argue. For I have buried one husband and raised one impossible son, and I will not be argued with by a girl I already love. Tristan, see her to her carriage. She has no carriage, the Duke said, faintly. Then see her to mine. The Dowager swept toward the door, all lavender and victory, and paused with her hand on the frame, and looked back at the two of them, with a smile that took 10 years off her face. I am so happy, she said simply. You cannot know. Thursday, and she was gone, and her footsteps went away down the stair, and somewhere below a door closed, and the long gold room was suddenly, ringingly silent, except for the clock on the mantel, behind which a velvet box still sat, forgotten. Holding the face of a man 8 guineas could no longer be paid by his widow's distracted joy. The Duke let his head fall back against the chair and stared at the ceiling. Well, he said. No, said Verity. Not well. Nothing about this is well. You will go after her this instant and tell her the truth. I cannot. You can. It is the easiest thing in the world. Open your mouth and say, Mama, I lied. There is no such woman. I made her up, because you would have me wed Lady Sybil, and I would sooner be hanged at. She stopped herself before the worse words. Because you did not want to marry where you were told. It is not a noble reason, but it is an honest one, and an honest duke is still a duke. No one will turn you out of doors. He brought his head down, and looked at her, and the charm was gone, and the despair was gone, and what was left was something quieter, and far more dangerous to her composure. a man simply tired and ashamed and out of room to maneuver. "You heard her," he said. "You heard what she said. That she has been sick to her soul. Miss Crew, my mother has not spoken of being happy in 3 years. Not since my father was taken from us in the spring, and she put on her blacks, and stopped everything. The music, the dinners, the calling. I invented you to buy myself a single season's peace from her matchmaking. I did not know she would." His voice caught, and he mastered it, and his thumb went round his signet ring once more. "I did not know she would fall in love with you across a room in 90 seconds. If I tell her now that you do not exist, I do not merely confess a lie. I take the thing back. I put her into her blacks again with my own hands." Verity opened her mouth and found, for once in her watchful life, that she had nothing ready to say. "I will pay you," he went on, low and quick, leaning forward now, the words tumbling as though if he spoke fast enough he could outrun the shame of them. "Whatever your father's miniature was worth, 10 times over. 20. You came for 8 guineas. I will settle 800 on you, and a character, and a cottage anywhere in England you please, only." He stopped. He looked at his own hands. "Only let her have until the leaves turn. Let her be happy until the autumn. And then we shall quarrel, you and I, very publicly and very finally, and you shall jilt me, you, not I, so that the fault is mine, and your name stays clean, and you shall vanish with your £800 and never think of Elsmere again. 3 months. That is all I ask. 3 months of letting a grieving woman believe her son is loved." The clock ticked. Through the open window came the cry of a knife grinder working the square below, and the smell of hot stone and horse and, faintly, lavender, where the Dowager had passed. Verity Crew looked at the forgotten box behind the clock, the last work of her father's failing hand, that she had carried wrapped against her ribs across half of London. For 8 guineas she would now never be paid, and she looked at the broad-shouldered, ruined, asking man in front of her, and she heard herself, against every hard-won instinct she possessed, begin to say something that there would be no taking back at all. 3 months, Verity said. The word left her mouth, and she felt it go, the way she had once watched a coin slip between 2 floorboards in her father's workroom and known, even as it fell, that there would be no prying it back. She had said it. She heard the clock measure out the silence after. The Duke lifted his head. "You agree?" "I have not said what I agree to." She rose from the chair he had been ordered to seat her in, because she would not have this conversation looking up at anyone, and crossed to the cold hearth and stood where his mother had stood. The marble was warm under her gloved hand from the August sun coming flat through the long windows. "Sit down, Your Grace. You are looming, and a man looms badly when he is asking a favour." He sat. He did it without thinking, and she watched him notice that he had done it, and his mouth tugged sideways in something that was not quite a smile. "You are very free with the Duke's furniture. I have stood in better rooms than this, and been paid less than I'm owed in them, so you will forgive me if your guilt does not frighten me as it ought." Verity drew off one ruined glove, finger by finger, and laid it across her palm. The ink at the seams was 3 days old, the colour her father used to call lamp-black and regret. "Here are my terms, and they are not the ones you offered. I do not want £800. That reached him. He went still in the chair, wary now, a man who has learned that people who refuse money usually want something dearer. Everyone wants £800. I want 100, paid now, against the miniature your mother commissioned, which is hers, and which she has not yet seen, and which is the only honest thing in this room." She nodded at the clock, at the velvet box hidden behind it. "That is my father's last work. He finished the underpainting, and his hand failed him before the glazes, and I sat at his elbow for the last month, learning to be him, so that the Dowager Duchess would have her husband's face, and not a stranger's. It is worth £100. I will be paid for it, as a tradesman is paid. openly. And you will not make it part of your bargain, because the moment my father's work becomes a bribe, I have to fold it into the lie. And I find her voice did something unexpected, and she steadied it. I find I am not willing to do that. Not with the last of him. The room was quiet. Below, the knife grinder's wheel had stopped. Somewhere a horse stamped and a chain rang against a curb. Agreed, he said. Lo, the 100 is the miniatures. Separate, on my honor, such as it is. Then we may discuss the rest. She came back and sat, composed, because now she was negotiating, and that she could do in her sleep. For the 3 months, I will need an income that does not look like one. Your mother will dress me, you said. Let her. But I keep my own rooms in Clerkenwell, I keep my father's trade open, and I am never, under any circumstance, alone with you behind a closed door, because the one thing that ends this faster than the truth is the appearance of a different lie. Do you understand me? You are protecting your name. I am protecting the only thing I own outright. She held his gaze. You may break a betrothal, Your Grace, and the world calls you a rogue and buys you a drink. I break one, and the world calls me what it calls women, like me, and then it stops buying my miniatures. So when this ends, it ends the way you promised. I jilt you, in public, for cause, and I walk away with my reputation buffed brighter than when I came. You will help me build the reasons now, quietly, so they are there to be found when we need them. A man who is cold. A man who is high-handed. She tilted her head. It will not, I think, require a great deal of invention. For a moment he only looked at her. Then he laughed. The real one, she thought, not the golden one he kept for doorways. Short and rueful and surprised out of him. You have thought about this rather more thoroughly than I have, and I have had 2 months. You have had 2 months to enjoy a lie. I have had 4 minutes to inherit it. The terror concentrates the mind. She put her glove back on. Do we agree? He stood and crossed to her and held out his hand as a man does to another man closing a contract over horses or coal. It was not what a duke did to a painter's daughter. She looked at the broad hand a moment, the width of it, the old paint-pale callus across one knuckle that did not belong on a gentleman, and that she filed away to wonder at later. And then she took it. Tristan Verel, he said. Since you are to be engaged to me, you had better have the name. Verity Crew. But that you already stole. I did not steal it. His thumb passed once over his signet ring. That tell of his she had already learned. You gave it to her. I will spend a good deal of the next 3 months wondering why. So would she. But sharp witness that she was, she had long ago made a rule of never answering a question whose answer she did not yet trust herself with, and so she only inclined her head and let him ring for Banks, and went down to the Dowager Duchess's carriage with £100 promised, and 100 lies waiting to be born. The carriage was lacquered the deep blue-black of a beetle's wing, with the Elsmere arms small and gold on the door, and it smelled of leather warmed all day in the sun, and, under that, of the lavender water the dowager wore. A footman in powder handed Verity up as though she were made of spun sugar. She sat very straight against squabs, softer than her own bed, and watched London go by the window, the gloss of Mayfair giving way by degrees to the plainer brick of streets she knew. The awnings out against the heat, women fanning themselves on doorsteps, a dog asleep in the only shade on Theobald's Road. It was the dog that did it. A boy she half knew, the chandler's lad from her own court, was crossing behind the dog with a yoke of cans, and he looked up at the grand carriage as every soul looked up at it, idly, and then he saw her face at the window, and his mouth fell open, and the cans swung, and he stood stock still in the road staring after a painter's daughter being driven home like a duchess. Verity sat back out of the frame, but it was too late, and she knew it was too late, and she thought, with the cold clarity that had kept her fed for 10 years, by supper, my whole court will know Miss Crew came home in a coronet's carriage. By tomorrow, they will have invented the rest. The lie is already walking, and it has not even got its boots on. She had her boy stop the carriage at the corner, not the door, a last shred of discretion that would fool no one, and walked the last cobbles to the workroom over the colourman's shop, and let herself into the smell of turpentine and linseed and the particular dust of ground pigment that was the smell of her entire life. Her father's easel stood empty by the north window, where the light was true. She had not yet been able to move it. There was a letter pushed under the door, heavy paper, a crest pressed into lavender wax, a hand like a cavalry charge. My dear child, the Dowager had written, before her carriage had even brought Verity home, I have sent Madame Lisette to you on Thursday morning. Do not be frightened of her. She is French and therefore tragic, but she dresses me beautifully. You will wear the celadon for dinner. It is the colour of new things, and I will not be argued with. A. E. And then, beneath, smaller, the cavalry charge gone suddenly unsteady. I have not slept so well in 3 years as I shall sleep tonight. Thank you for being real. Mama. Verity sat down on the stool at her father's empty easel, with the letter in her lap and the celadon green order in it, and the word real under her thumb, and for a long while she did not move at all. Outside, the heat pressed on. A fly worried at the window. Somewhere below, the colourman was grinding something, and the slow rasp of stone on stone came up through the boards like the sound of a thing being worn away. Thursday came hot and white. Madame Lisette arrived at 9, tragic as promised, and by noon Verity Crew had been pinned into celadon silk the colour of a pond under willows, and made to turn before a glass until she did not know her own shoulders. By 8 she stood in the Elsmere hall, beeswax and lilies and cool marble after the furnace of the street, being looked at by a butler who had been trained from birth to look at no one, and who looked at her. The Dowager descended on her in grey violet and pearls, and seized both her hands. There, she said, low and fierce and pleased. Now they shall all see what I see. And then, dropping her voice further, with a glance up the stair, Augusta is here, and in a temper, for I told her at 4 o'clock and not before, on purpose, so she should have no time to write to anyone. Be brave, my truth-teller. She bites, but she has no teeth I have not already pulled. She was wrong about the teeth. Verity knew it within the first minute of the long dining room. Lady Augusta Verel sat already at the table. Though no one had been called to it, a beautiful woman gone hard, the way good wax goes hard. All planes and edges. Her dark hair dressed high, and her gown a black purple that was mourning made fashionable. She watched Verity come in over the rim of a glass she was not drinking from, and her eyes did the same swift pricing the Dowagers had done 3 days before. Except that where the mother had ended in tears, the aunt ended in a small, satisfied smile, as of a woman who has been told a sum is large, and has just seen for herself that it is counterfeit. So, Lady Augusta said, the famous secret. Aunt, Tristan had come in behind Verity. She felt the warmth of him at her shoulder before she heard him. You will be kind, or you will be elsewhere. I am always kind. I am the kindest woman in London. Ask anyone I have ruined. She set down her glass. Sit by me, Miss Crew. Is it? Such a plain little name. Sit by me and tell me all about yourself, since my nephew, who tells me everything, has told me nothing whatsoever about you, which is itself the most interesting thing I have learned this season. There was a fourth at the table, half risen, uncertain. A slight fair girl of 19 or so, in white muslin, with a sweet, anxious face, and the kind of beauty that apologizes for itself. Lady Sybil Daundry. She had been brought, Verity understood with a sinking heart, to be jilted gently, and no one had yet found the moment. And so she sat between the hard aunt and the radiant mother, like a lamb who has noticed the table is laid and cannot quite think what for. Miss Crew, Lady Sybil said, and dropped a little curtsy that was far too good for the company. Aye, congratulations. I am so very happy for you both. She meant it. That was the unbearable thing. Verity, who read faces for her bread, read in this one no malice at all. Only a brave girl saying the line she had been raised to say while something behind her eyes worked very hard not to show. "You are kind," Verity said, and meant it back, and hated the whole arrangement with a sudden clean fury that surprised her. They sat. The soup came, cold and green and tasting of cucumber and the garden. The candles had not been lit, for there was light enough still in the long windows, the slow gold light of an August evening, and it lay across the silver and the cloth, and made everything look like a painting Verity would not have signed. Because it was a lie about a happy family. "Tell me," said Lady Augusta, into the soup, where one finds a Miss Crew. "I have hunted Tristan's eligible misses for 10 years, and never flushed you. Were you abroad? In a convent? Under a stone?" "In Clerkenwell," Verity said. "Which I grant is much the same as under a stone, to a woman who has never been east of Bond Street." The Dowager laughed aloud. Lady Sybil's lips twitched, and were sternly recalled. Lady Augusta did not laugh. "Clerkenwell," she turned the word over, as though looking for the maker's mark. "And your people?" "My father painted. My mother sewed. They are neither of them here to be impressed by your china, Lady Augusta, which I am sure they would regret." "A painter?" The aunt's smile sharpened to a point. "How charming. A Dauber. And the Duke of Elsmere is to marry a Dauber's girl, and his mother weeps for joy. And I am the only soul at this table, with wit enough left to ask the obvious. Augusta." The Dowager's voice came down the length of the table like a dropped book. "Which is why?" Lady Augusta did not so much as glance at her sister-in-law. She leaned toward Verity, and her perfume was a tar of roses gone slightly past its hour, sweet and pressing. Why would a man who could have had the Daundry fortune and that pretty child's hand for the asking? Lady Sybil flinched, and Verity felt it like a pin. Choose instead a penniless paint grinder with ink on her gloves at my brother's table. "You will say love. They always say love. But I have buried my vanity, Miss Crew, not my arithmetic, and the sums here do not come right. And I shall sit at every dinner from now to the wedding, adding them up until they do." The room held its breath. Outside, a blackbird sang in the plane trees of the square, absurdly sweet, and Tristan Verel set down his spoon. "Aunt Augusta," he said, "you have asked why, and you deserve an answer. So here it is. I am marrying Miss Crew, because she is the first person to enter a room of mine in 5 years who looked at me and not at the house behind me." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to, and Verity heard, under the easy words, that the man had finally said one true thing inside his lie, and did not himself know it. "You may add your sums as long as you like. They will not come right, because love has never once in the history of the world come right on paper, which is precisely how the rest of us know it from a contract." He picked the spoon up again. "The soup is excellent, Mama. Is it Cook's? Or have you a new one?" "Cook's," said the Dowager faintly, gazing at her son as though he had pulled a dove from the cloth. Lady Augusta sat back. Something flickered behind the hard, bright face. Not defeat. Verity would not have flattered herself it was defeat. But recalculation. The look of a gambler who has seen the other player raise, and now must wonder what is held. She lifted her undrunk glass at last, and touched it to her lips, and set it down. And she smiled at Verity, with her whole charming, terrible face. "Well played, nephew," she said softly to him, but watching Verity. "Well played indeed." And Verity, who had not touched her own spoon, who had sat through the whole exchange with her hands quiet in her lap and her heart going like a struck bell, thought, "He defended me. He did not have to defend me so well." And she saw that too. She saw the truth in it before either of us did. That is what she is adding up. Not whether I am poor. Whether he means it. The dinner went on. It went on through a turbot, and a saddle of lamb, and a remove of summer fruits piled in a silver epergne, peaches and the first hothouse grapes. The candles lit at last as the windows went blue, and through all of it Lady Augusta was charm itself, was wit and warmth and old family stories. And not once did Verity relax, because a knife laid down is not a knife put away. It was over the fruit that the Dowager rose, glowing, a peach forgotten in her fingers, and made the announcement that turned the whole bargain on its head. "I cannot keep it in another hour," she said, "so I shall not try. My dears, I have decided. We shall not hide this happiness away in corners as Tristan, in his foolishness, wished to. A thing this good is owed to the world." She set the peach down. "I am giving a ball. Here, in a fortnight, before the town empties for the country. The last ball of the season. And the best. And at it I shall present my son's betrothed to every soul who ever pitied me for a lonely widow." She turned shining eyes on Verity. "You shall be announced, my truth-teller. By name. To all of them, and then no Augusta on earth may add her sums, for the thing will be done in the sight of London, and done is done." The fork in Verity's hand was very cold. Across the table she saw Tristan's face arrange itself into delight a half-second too slow, saw the same drop she had seen in him at his mother's first arrival, the powder reaching the fire, for a ball. A public announcement by name before all the world was the precise opposite of the quiet 3 months he had bought, was the one thing that could not be quietly undone in autumn with a private quarrel and a clean exit. A jilting whispered between two families was survivable. A betrothal cried aloud to the whole ton, and then, unsaid, was a scandal with her name nailed to its mast. "Mama," he began, "a fortnight is very short, then we shall all be very busy." The Dowager was already past argument, already gone into the bright country of her plans. "Verity, you and I shall choose the silk tomorrow. Augusta, you will manage the daunderies. Kindly, Sybil, child. You will dance the first with my nephew at it, before he is given away. For I will not have it said this family used you ill, of course," whispered Lady Sybil, white as her muslin. "And it will be perfect, and I shall cry the entire evening, and you must all forgive me in advance." She laughed, and pressed her hands together, and was so plainly wholly happy that for a moment no one at the table could find it in themselves to break her. Then Lady Augusta turned her head, slowly, and looked at Verity down the candlelit length of the cloth, and her eyes were not adding sums any longer. They had finished. They had arrived at a total, and the total pleased her, and she lifted her glass a second time, drinking now, the first sip Verity had seen her take all night, over the rim of it, with the expression of a woman who has just been handed, by a doting fool, exactly the fortnight she requires. "A ball," she murmured. "How perfectly delightful. So much may be discovered about a person in a fortnight, when one knows at last where to look." She set the glass down and smiled at Verity, sweet as the rotting roses of her scent. "Clerkenwell, you said, above a colourman's, I should think, by the lamp-black on your gloves. I do so love a long drive of a summer morning. Perhaps I shall take one." And under the table, where no one could see it, Verity Crew's hand closed slowly into the celadon silk of a gown she did not own, in a house she did not belong to, while the Dowager wept her happy tears, and the doomed sweet girl in white stared at her untouched peach. And she understood that the lie she had inherited 4 days ago had just been given a fortnight to live, a stage to die on, and a hunter who already knew the road to her door. The drive home that night was all darkness and lavender, and the soft roll of springs better than her own bed, and Verity Crew sat in the corner of the Dowager's carriage, with her gloved hands folded, and watched the gas lamps of Mayfair give way by degrees to the unlit dark of streets that knew her. She did not weep. She had a rule against weeping in other people's carriages, the same as her rule against laughing where she could not afford it. But she pressed her thumb once, hard, into the place where Lady Augusta's parting words still sat under her ribs like a swallowed coin. "I do so love a long drive of a summer morning." And she did her arithmetic, the way the aunt had done hers, all the long way home. A fortnight. A ball. Her own name cried aloud to the whole of London. And a beautiful hard woman who already knew the road to her door. She let herself into the turpentine dark and did not light a candle, and lay a long time in her narrow bed listening to the colourman's cat walk the gutter, and somewhere near 3 she understood that she was no longer frightened only for her reputation. She was frightened of the fortnight itself, of how much could be made to happen in it, and how little of it she would be holding the reins. Morning came white and pitiless. By 10 she was standing in a silk mercer's on Ludgate Hill with the Dowager Duchess of Elsmere, who moved through bolts of shantung and lutestring and figured Italian silk the way an admiral moves through a fleet, and who had not stopped talking, happily, since the carriage. No, that blue is for a woman who wishes to be forgiven, and you shall never need forgiving. The Dowager swept on. Show me the ambers. The deep ones, like a glass of something the physicians forbid me. The mercer's man unrolled a fall of amber silk across the counter, and it caught the light from the high dusty windows and ran like poured honey, and even Verity, who had ground 1,000 pigments and thought herself proof against colour, felt her breath go. There, said the Dowager softly. Oh, there she is. Your Grace, it is far too fine. It is precisely fine enough. You will be presented in it. The Dowager laid her ringed hand flat on the silk and looked at Verity over it, and her eyes had gone bright again, the way they did 3 or 4 times an hour now. Helplessly, I have dressed a great many young women to be looked at. Child, I never once before dressed one I wished the looking to be kind to. Let me have this. It is a small selfishness in an old woman. Verity opened her mouth to refuse, and found the refusal would cost the Dowager something, and shut it again. This is how it works, she thought. Not all at once. A silk here, a kindness there, until you are wearing the lie next to your skin, and cannot remember which threads are yours. Then thank you, she said. It is the most beautiful thing I have ever stood near. The bell over the shop door rang, and the heat of the street came in, and with it came Tristan Verel, Duke of Elsmere, ducking the low lintel with his hat in his hand, and an expression of a man who has been sent on an errand, and means to make the best of it. Mama, Banks said I should find you laying siege to Ludgate Hill. He bowed over his mother's hand, and then turned to Verity, and the golden smile came up, but a half-beat slower than it had 3 days ago, she noticed, as though some part of the performance had begun to tire of itself. Miss Crew, you look as though you have been ambushed by sunlight. I have been ambushed by your mother, which is more thorough. Yes, he agreed gravely. There is no quarter in it. I have been losing skirmishes to her since I was in short coats. The Dowager, deep in negotiation now with the mercer over an L1/2, waved them off without looking. Walk to the end of the counter, the pair of you, and stop breathing down my purchase. Tristan, tell her about the orangery. She is to know the house she is to live in. And there it was, light as anything, the house she is to live in, dropped into the warm dim shop, and Verity watched the Duke take it without a flinch, the practiced man, and steer her by the elbow 3 steps along the counter, into a bay of shadow between 2 leaning bolts of grey silk, where they might, for the length of a breath, speak as themselves. How bad, he said, low, his smile still pointed mercerward, was last night, after I was banished to the port. You were not banished. You fled. I retreated in good order. His thumb found the signet ring. Augusta, what did she say to you, when the men had gone? That she loves a long drive of a summer morning. Verity watched his face. She knows the lampblack on my gloves for a colourman's. She means to come to Clerkenwell. She has been adding her sums, and she has stopped adding them, Your Grace, which is far worse, because it means she thinks she has the answer, and only wants the proof. The smile went out of him by inches. In the grey shadow, with the dust turning gold in the one shaft of window light between them, she watched the charming Duke of Elsmere become only a tired young man who had built a house of paper and just felt the first true wind move through it. Then we must give her something true to find that is not the truth, he said. We must furnish your life as though it were real, Did you? He stopped, and something almost rueful crossed him. I am about to ask you to help me lie more carefully, and you are about to despise me for it. I have despised abler men for less. Go on. There you are. He murmured, and for the first time it was she who was startled, for it was not charm, it was something drier and warmer underneath the charm, the small private voice he kept beneath the golden one. And it had said, "There you are," as though he had been looking for the sharp particular sound of her, and was pleased to have found it among the silk. Verity felt the comment land somewhere it had no business landing, and was annoyed, and filed the annoyance away to examine never. "Furnish my life how," she said. "Letters. A courtship leaves a paper trail, and ours has none, because it never happened. If Augusta drives to Clerkenwell, she will find a workroom and a grieving daughter, and not one line in my hand to say I ever crossed the threshold." He spoke quickly now, the plan assembling itself as he went. "So I shall write to you. Today, dated back. Dull, proper letters a man may write to the woman he means to marry. You will keep them where they may be found, but not too easily found, as a woman keeps a thing she treasures. And one of them, the earliest, will mention the miniature, that I came to your father's rooms to sit for a likeness, and stayed, and came again. There, a reason for a duke in Clerkenwell that any aunt on earth will believe, because it is half true. I did come. The box is on my mantel still." Verity was quiet a moment, turning it. It was good. It was, God help them both, very good. The lie braced against the one true beam in the building. The way her father had taught her to brace a thin glaze over a sound under painting, so the eye believed the whole. And she hated how good it was, and hated more that some traitor corner of her was warming to the game and to the quick grey eyes inventing it. "You came to sit for a likeness," she repeated slowly. "Your Grace, may I ask you?" A tradesman's question. "You may ask me anything. I have lately mislaid the right to refuse you." The callus. She did not touch it. She only looked deliberately at the back of his right hand, where it rested against the grey silk, at the pale flat mark across the second knuckle. Old and smooth. The wrong callus entirely, for a man who held nothing heavier than reins and a wineglass. I have ground colour for 10 years, and worn that exact mark, and seen it on precisely one kind of person. Who taught a duke to hold a brush? He went very still. Across the shop his mother laughed at something the mercer said, and the bell rang on a new customer, and the heat pressed at the windows, and Tristan Verel looked down at his own hand as though it had betrayed him from the inside. "My father," he said at last. Just that. And then, because she waited, and because waiting was the only weapon she had ever truly trusted, he drew. Badly, and constantly, and never where it could be seen, because dukes do not. He used to come up to the schoolroom when the house was full of people he could not bear, and we would sit at the one north window and he would teach me to see. Not the thing, Tristan, the light on the thing, and we told no one, because it was ours. His mouth twisted. When he was taken from us I could not. I have not held a pencil in 3 years. I did not know the mark was still there until you looked at it. Trust a paint grinder's daughter to read a man's hands like a ledger. It is the only book most people leave open, Verity said softly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The shaft of dusty light hung between them, and she thought, with the clean, useless clarity that was her gift and her affliction both, he did not invent me to escape his mother. Not only. He invented a woman who would look at him, and not the house, and he has spent 3 years starving for the one person his father made him into, the one who sees the light on the thing. And he does not know it, and I must not tell him, because the moment either of us names it, the 3 months are no longer a bargain. They are something we will not survive the ending of. Write your letters, she said, and stepped back out of the light. Date them carefully. A man in love is careless about everything, except the things he cannot bear to lose. So be careless about the dull parts, and exact about the box. And your grace, she paused. When your aunt comes to my door, she will not be looking for letters. She will be looking for my face when I am not expecting her. You cannot date that back. That one I shall have to paint myself. On the morning. From life. The silk was bought. The dowager bore them out into the white furnace of the street, talking of orange flower water and dancing masters. And Tristan handed his mother, and then Verity, up into the carriage. And his hand under Verity's gloved fingers was warm, and his thumb passed once, without his knowing it, across her knuckles where a colourman's callus would have been, as if checking, as if learning her by the same book he had just been read out of. And then he stepped back, and bowed, and the carriage rolled. And Verity sat very straight and did not look out the little oval window at the man standing bare-headed in the heat, watching it go. She had 3 days of borrowed peace. On the 4th, Lady Augusta took her long drive of a summer morning. Verity was at the easel when the carriage came. Not her father's empty easel by the north window, which she still could not bear to use, but the low table, where she did her own small work, copying a gentleman's hunting dog from a sketch for a guinea that would feed her a fortnight if the Duke's 100 never came. She had ground her own black that morning, lamp-black and a breath of indigo, and her gloves were off, and her fingers were dark to the second knuckle, and she heard the wheels in the narrow court below, and knew them at once for what they were, because no neighbour of hers owned springs that quiet. She did not run to the glass. She had told Tristan the truth. This was the portrait she had to paint from life, and a portrait is ruined by hurry. She wiped her fingers slowly on the rag, and she was still wiping them when the colourman's boy thundered up the stair to gasp that a lady, a grand lady, was below asking for Miss Crew, and behind him, unhurried, came the attar of roses gone past its hour. Do not trouble yourself, boy. I shall announce myself. Lady Augusta filled the low doorway in dove-grey driving silk and a hat with a curling feather, and she stood there a moment, letting her eyes do their pricing of the room. The rasping colourman's shop below felt through the boards. The north window, the smell of turpentine and linseed and groundstone, the narrow bed not quite hidden behind a curtain, the empty easel. Especially the empty easel. Well, she said, so this is where one finds a Miss Crew. Under a stone, much as you said. How honest of you. I confess I did not believe you. Lady Augusta. Verity rose, and did not curtsy low, and did not apologize for her blackened hands, and did not offer the single good chair too quickly. You have had a hot drive. There is small beer, or water from the conduit that is at least cold. I cannot offer you tea in a duchess's service, I am afraid. We are plainer here. You are. The aunt came in, drawing off one grey glove, and walked the length of the small room with the slow appetite of a woman who has been waiting weeks to look at exactly this. She trailed a bare finger along the colour shelf, the rank jars, vermilion and umber and the precious cobalt, the muller, the slab, and she stopped before the empty easel and stood looking at the dustless rectangle on the boards where it had stood being worked at, very lately, by a hand now stilled. Your father's, she said. Not a question. Yes. He took commissions. Augusta turned. The hard, beautiful face had set into something almost kind, which was the most frightening thing it had done yet. Miniatures, the boy below tells me, before I sent him for his small beer. A fashionable little trade, the painting of faces too dear to lose. I should think a great many grieving people came up these stairs. She let the word grieving lie there a moment. Tell me, Miss Crew, for I am a tiresome aunt, and must have my answer. What was the last commission your poor father took, before his hand failed him? I find I should very much like to know. And Verity, who read faces for her bread, watched Lady Augusta's face as she asked it, and understood that the question was not a question either. The aunt already knew. She had stopped below in the colourman's shop. She had asked her sweet pressing questions of a man who ground pigment for his bread, and could not afford to be discreet to a lady in a feathered hat. She had the answer in her reticule already, and she had only climbed the stair to watch Verity hand it to her, or fail to, and be caught in the failing. The point of no return arrived very quietly, in a hot small room that smelled of turpentine, with a colour man rasping stone on stone below like the sound of a thing being worn away. The last commission my father took, Verity said, evenly, was a likeness of the late Duke of Elsmere, for his widow. He finished the drawing and the underpainting before his hand failed. I finished the glazes myself, learning to be him at his elbow, and I carried it across London a week ago to put it into the family's hands. That is how I came to be in your nephew's drawing room, Lady Augusta. That is the answer you bought from the man below. You may have it from me as well, since you have driven so far for it. For the first time, something moved in Augusta's face that was not calculation. Surprise, perhaps, that the quarry had turned and laid the trap's own jaws open on the table between them. You admit it, she said slowly. I am a tradesman's daughter. I admit to a commission honestly fulfilled the way any tradesman does. Verity did not blink. What is it you imagine you have caught, Lady Augusta? That my father painted for the family I am to marry into? Half the great houses in London have a crew in a locket. That a poor woman delivered her own work rather than pay a carrier she could not afford? I should think the meanness of it would shame the family rather than me. That, said Augusta, very softly, recovering herself, stepping close so that the rotten rose scent of her pressed in with the heat. A woman came to that house a week ago to be paid 8 guineas. The man below was most precise about the sum, and walked out of it the betrothed of a duke. In 7 days. That, Miss Crew, is not a courtship. I have seen courtships. They are tedious, and they take months, and they leave letters. Her bright eyes searched Verity's, hunting the flinch. There are no months here. There is a box, and a sum, and a fortnight's old engagement my nephew has told no living soul the particulars of, and a girl with cobalt under her nails whom his own mother could not name 3 days before she met her. Now, I am going to ask you one thing, and I shall know if you lie, for I have made a study of liars and married 2 of them. Did my nephew court you, or did he buy you? The room held its breath. The colourman's stone went round and round below. Through the open north window, a costermonger cried strawberries, sweet and far away, and a fly battered the glass, and Verity Crew stood with her black-stained hands quiet at her sides, and understood that there was no clever third thing to say. There was the truth, which ruined Tristan and his mother both. There was the lie, which Augusta had already half disproved, and would spend a fortnight finishing. And there was the narrow blade between them, where she had lived her whole watchful life. He came to sit for a likeness, she heard herself say, and her voice did not shake, which was its own small miracle. He came to my father's rooms in the spring before, for his own portrait, a gift he meant for his mother in her grief. He came 4 times. He stayed past the light each time, which my father remarked on, for sitters do not, as a rule, linger in a colourman's garret when their carriage waits below. She let it build, slow, exact about the part that could be checked, careless about the rest, just as he had taught her in the silk. I was finishing his late father's miniature at the same table. We spoke of light, Lady Augusta, of how it falls on a thing and makes it true. It is not a subject that fills months. Some things do not need months. You asked, did he buy me? No. He has not given me a farthing, and I have not asked him for one, and the 8 guineas your colourman counted so precisely are owed me still, for my father's last work, which your nephew's mother has not even seen, because she was too busy weeping over a girl she had decided to love to think of paying her. Verity's chin came up. Drive back and tell the Dowager that, if you like. Tell her son's betrothed is still owed 8 guineas for her husband's face. I should be glad to be paid. I have a landlord who shares your fondness for arithmetic. It was the best work she had ever done, and she knew it even as she did it. The braced glaze over the sound beam, the lie standing only because it leaned its whole weight on the one true thing, and she watched it reach Lady Augusta and saw, with a sinking that had no bottom, that it was not quite enough. The aunt's eyes had narrowed not in defeat, but in respect. The respect of one craftsman for another. And that was the most dangerous response of all. "You are very good," Augusta murmured. "Do you know? I almost believe the light. You should put that in the bills you cannot pay, Miss Crew. For one duke, 4 sittings, lit beautifully." She drew her grey glove back on, finger by finger, the way Verity herself drew on hers, and the mirror of it was deliberate and cruel. "But you have made one small error, child, and it is the error of all clever people, which is to give the cleverer answer when the duller one would have served. A woman truly loved does not stand in her garret and complain of 8 guineas owed. She does not think of the 8 guineas at all. You thought of them at once, because they are the realest thing in this whole affair, and you cannot help being honest about what is real. It is your one flaw." She moved to the door, and paused, and looked back, and the curling feather on her hat trembled in the heat. "I shall not expose you today. Today would waste it. There is a ball in 11 days, Miss Crew, to which the whole of London is bidden, at which my sister means to cry your name aloud as her son's chosen wife, and the higher she builds a thing, the further it has to come down, and the more people there are below to watch it land. I am a patient woman. I have buried 2 husbands, and outlived my look's best decade, and I have learned that the sweetest revenges are the ones you let ripen. You have 11 days. I should spend them, were I you, deciding whether you would rather vanish quietly now, with the 8 guineas you keep mentioning, and not 1 penny more, for I will pay them myself this minute to be rid of you, or be taken apart in front of 1,000 candles, by a woman who already knows precisely where the seams are." She laid 2 gold coins on the colour shelf, beside the vermilion. They gleamed there, obscene and tidy. "There," she said. 8 guineas. Now you have been paid, and the only true thing in your story is no longer true, and you may build the rest on nothing at all. And watch how it stands. Good morning, Miss Crew. Mind the stair. It is very steep, and I should hate for you to come down it faster than you meant to." And she was gone, dove grey and unhurried. The feather bobbing down into the dark of the stairwell, and the quiet carriage took her away, and Verity Crew stood alone in the turpentine heat, with 2 gold coins burning on the shelf and the empty easel at her shoulder, and her father's strawberries crying far off in the street. And for the first time since the Duke had breathed "pretend you're ill" and "leave now" against her ear, she felt the whole structure of the lie shift under her like a floor with a coin gone through it. She did not touch the coins. She sat down on her father's stool at the empty easel, used it at last, because her knees would no longer hold her near the shelf where the gold lay, and she put her black-stained hands over her face, and she breathed turpentine and linseed and the smell of her whole life, and she did her arithmetic again, and this time the sums came out the way Augustus had. 11 days. Then 1,000 candles, and a woman who knew where the seams were, and a name, her name, the small lie she could never take back. Verity, truth, oh that is well, cried aloud to the whole of London, just in time to be torn down. She was still sitting so when the second carriage came. She did not hear it over the colourman's stone until it had stopped, and then there were boots on the stair, quick and heavy, and entirely unlike the aunt's grey hush, and the low door filled, and it was Tristan, hatless again, his coat dark at the spine with the heat of a fast drive, his grey eyes going at once to her face and reading there. In one stricken instant, everything, she came. He crossed the room before she could rise. Banks heard it from her coachman not an hour ago, that she had ordered the horses for Clerkenwell at dawn, and I came as fast as Verity. He stopped himself a careful arm's length away. Because of her rule, even now, even white-faced and out of breath, he kept her rule, and the keeping of it undid her more than touching would have. What did she take from you? Everything that was real, Verity said, and lowered her hands, and looked at him, and found she could not keep the steadiness in her voice any longer. She paid me the 8 guineas herself. She put them on the shelf. She knows my father took the commission. She knows the sum. She knows there are no months and no letters yet to find them. And she is not going to expose us today, Your Grace. She is going to wait. 11 days. She means to do it at the ball, by name, in front of all of them, because the higher your mother builds it, the further it falls, and the more of London she gathers to watch it land. Her breath caught. I gave her the best lie I have ever told, and she admired it and said it would not serve. And she was right, and I am out of cleverer answers. Do you understand me? I have spent my whole life one quick word ahead of ruin, and your aunt has just shown me a fortnight in which there is no word quick enough. He stood very still in the hot turning light, and she watched the charm not even attempt to rise, watched him take it full in the chest, the man who had bought a single season's peace and was now to pay for it with 2 lives in front of 1,000 candles. And what came up in his face was not despair this time, and not the golden smile, but something she had not seen in him before, and did not know how to brace a glaze against. Then we do not let her choose the ground, he said quietly. She has named the field and the hour. Very well. A man who lets his enemy pick the field has already half lost. My father taught me that too, at the same north window. Over a battle of toy soldiers he refused to let me win cheaply. He looked at the 2 coins on the shelf, and then at the empty easel, and then at Verity, and his thumb did not go to his ring. It stayed, deliberately, at his side. 11 days. She thinks that is her fortnight to dig the grave in. I should like it to be ours to make the thing so true that there is nothing left for her to unmake. He drew a breath. But I will not ask that of you across an arm's length in your own father's rooms, with her gold still on your shelf, as though it were one more clause in a bargain. So, I am going to ask it badly, and as myself, and you may throw me down your very steep stair after. Verity, will you stop helping me lie, and help me make it real instead? The colourman's stone went round and round below. The strawberries cried. The fly found the open window at last, and was gone into the white heat, and the 2 gold coins lay on the shelf beside the vermilion, paid and ruinous. And Verity Crew sat at her father's empty easel, and looked at the broad-shouldered asking man 11 days from the end of everything, and felt the word she had sworn, never to spend a second time, rise in her throat like a coin coming back up through the floor. Yes, Verity said. The word came up out of her the way the other one had, 4 days before, with no taking it back, but this time she did not feel it fall through a gap in the floor. This time she felt it land on something. She looked at the broad-shouldered man 11 days from ruin, standing his careful arm's length away in the turpentine heat, keeping her rule even now, and she heard her own voice go on past the place where caution had always stopped it. Yes, not because it is wise, for it is the least wise thing I have done in a life of being wise on an empty stomach. But I find I would rather make a true thing badly than a false thing well, and I have spent 10 years doing the reverse. And I am tired, Your Grace, all the way through. She wiped her black fingers a last time on the rag. So, we have 11 days. Tell me how a man courts a woman backwards, and let us leave a paper trail your aunt can break her teeth on. He let out a breath that shook on the way, and the smile he gave her then was not golden at all. It was crooked, and grateful, and far too young for a duke. I have no notion how to court anyone forwards. I have only ever fled. Then, we are well matched. I have only ever watched. She pulled the stool out from her father's easel, and set it square in the north light. Sit. If you came to my father's rooms 4 times in the spring to sit for a likeness, then a likeness there had better be, for your aunt will ask to see it, and a courtship that leaves no picture is a poor courtship indeed. Sit, and hold still, and let me catch the light on you, and we shall have made one true thing before the week is out, whatever else burns down. He sat. He folded his big hands on his knee, the paint-pale callus showing across the second knuckle, and he held himself the way men hold themselves who have been painted before. Chin lifted, shoulders set, a portrait of a duke. Verity ground a little black on the slab, lamp black and a breath of indigo, and watched him over the muller, and said nothing, and let the silence do its slow work, and by degrees the duke went out of his shoulders, and a tired young man came up into them instead. "There," she said softly. "That. Not the thing. The light on the thing." His head came round. "He said that. To you. He said it to everyone who would stand still long enough. He said it to a marrow seller once on Leather Lane, and the man wept." She set the first dark line down, the turn of a jaw she was beginning to know. "Be still. You move when you are moved." So she painted him, in the long white afternoons of that fortnight, with the colourman's boy posted on the stair for propriety, and the door wedged on the heat, and Tristan Verel talked. He talked of the orangery where the glass had cracked, and never been mended, because the man who loved it was gone, of toy soldiers refused him cheaply at a north window, of the way his father had taught him that to draw a thing you must first forgive it for not holding still. He told her things she was certain he had told no one, and she gave him back, in the careful coin of her trade, small true pieces of herself, her mother's needle, the gin-smelling landlord, the coin between the floorboards, until one slow gold evening, watching her load her brush, he said, "Without any performance in it at all, when the leaves turn I shall have grown quite used to this. I shall not know what to do with the quiet after you have gone." The brush stopped. Outside a barrow rumbled over the cobbles, and a child laughed and the heat pressed on the glass. "You are not to say things like that," Verity said. "We are building a wall to hide behind, you and I, not a window to stand at." "No," he agreed. "Quite right. Lamp black and regret. Your father called that colour. I have decided it is my favourite. Put more of it in the coat." And it was so dry, so quiet, that she laughed before she could stop it, the laugh she had spent her life not affording. And across the room the colourman's boy on the stair grinned to hear it. And for one bright, treacherous moment the lie was the truest thing in London. That was the moment the letter came to spoil. It came on the 9th day, by a footman she did not know, on heavy paper with no crest pressed in the wax, which was itself a warning, for a duke who wished to be seen wrote openly, and a duke who wished to be secret did not. Verity broke the plain seal at her father's easel with black still under her nails, and read it once, and then a second time, slowly, the way you read a thing that has rearranged the furniture of your life while your back was turned. "Miss Crew, do not come to the ball. I have learned that Augusta has found the colourman willing to swear to the 8 guineas before witnesses, and a duke's word will not outweigh a tradesman's account book in the mouths of 1,000 idle people. I will not let you stand in that room and be taken apart for my cowardice. I shall tell my mother, myself, tomorrow before it is cried aloud, that I invented a betrothal to spare myself her matchmaking, and that you were a stranger who did me a kindness and is owed nothing but my apology. The fault will be mine, wholly and publicly, and your name will not be in it. The £800 is lodged with my bankers in your name from this morning. It is not a bribe. It is a debt. And you will take it. You have been the best thing in a bad year, and I am sorry to have made you part of a worse one. Elsmere. She read it a third time. Elsmere. Not Tristan. He had signed it with the house. Verity set the letter down on the slab beside the ground black, and stood very still while the colourman's stone went round and round below her feet, wearing the day away. She had been right all along then, in the only way that had ever kept her fed. He had wanted a woman to stand between himself and his mother's plans, and she had been the cheapest one to hand. And now that the standing had grown costly, he was paying her off and putting her out by the cleanest door he could find. He had named her clever and poor and indifferent to his rank, and he had been describing, the whole time, a tool that fit his hand. The afternoons of painting, the light on the thing, the eye shall not know what to do with the quiet. He had spent those the way a man spends easy charm in a doorway, to get a frightened creature to do what he needed quietly. He had never seen Verity Crew at all. He had seen a solution with cobalt under its nails, and now he had a tidier one, which was £800 and a closed door, and he was calling it kindness, because kindness cost him least. She did not weep over it. She had a rule. But she sat down on her father's stool and folded the Duke's letter into a hard small square and held it in her blackened fist until the edges cut, and she did her arithmetic, and the sums came out cold and clean. A girl who lived by being seen had let herself be seen, and it had cost exactly what she had always known it would cost, and the only thing left to decide was whether she would take the money and the silence and go. She unfolded the letter. She read the last line once more, "You have been the best thing in a bad year," and she heard her own voice, dry and disloyal, say into the empty room, "No, you do not get to write me out in your own hand and call it mine. If anybody in this affair is to tell the truth aloud, it shall be the one of us whose name it actually is." She put on the amber. The Elsmere house on the night of the ball was a lantern set down in the hot dark of the square, every window gold, the steps carpeted, the air above the roofline shimmering with the heat of 1,000 candles thrown up through the glass. Verity came in the Dowager's own carriage, sent for her at 6 as if nothing in the world were wrong, and she climbed the carpeted steps in amber silk the colour of poured honey, with her father's voice in her ears, not the thing, the light on the thing, and a footman in powder took her wrap, and the noise of the ballroom came down the marble stair to meet her like surf, fiddles and feet, and the high bright clamour of people determined to be gay before the town emptied for the country. She did not go up. Not yet. She had come early, before the worst of the crush, because a portrait is ruined by hurry, and so is a confession, and she meant to find the Dowager and be private with her before a single candle of this was cried aloud. A servant, asked Lowe, sent her along a cooler corridor toward the small saloon where her grace was resting her feet before the receiving began, and it was there, passing an open door she had thought empty, that Verity saw Lady Augusta alone. The room was a little antechamber lit by one branch of candles, and Augusta stood at the cold marble chimney-piece with her back to the door, out of her armour for a moment, not knowing herself watched. She held something small in her gloved palm, tilted to the candle, a miniature, oval, ivory-backed, the size to sit in a locket or a gentleman's hand. Verity, who knew her father's work the way she knew her own breath, knew the hand that had painted it across the length of the room, the soft true light, the kindness in the underpainting. It was a young man's face. Augusta's thumb moved across the painted cheek, once, slowly, the way a person touches a thing when they have forgotten their hand is doing it, and her hard, beautiful profile in the candlelight had gone soft and unguarded and unbearably young. A woman of 50, looking at a spring that was 30 years behind her. She stood so a long moment. Then she closed her fingers over the ivory and pressed her knuckle to her mouth. Verity stepped back from the threshold. She went on down the cool corridor toward the small saloon and let the antechamber and the woman in it keep what little the candle had shown, and she carried the picture of it with her like a wet glaze she must not smudge, and she understood. Walking, more than she had understood in the whole fortnight of being hunted. The Dowager was alone in the small saloon, magnificent in silver grey and the Elsmere pearls, fanning herself slowly and smiling at nothing, the happiest woman in the lantern of her house. She rose when she saw Verity, and her whole face opened. "There you are, O child. The amber. I knew it. I knew the moment I saw the bolt. Come, let me look at you before I must give you away to all of them, your grace." Verity stopped just inside the door and put her hands together to keep them still. "Before you give me to anyone, I must give you something, and you will not like it, and I am going to do it anyway, because my father named me Truth, and I have made rather a poor account of it lately." The Dowager's fan slowed. The smile stayed, but a wariness came up behind it, the look of a woman who has heard "I must tell you something" before, and learned what tends to follow. You are very pale. Sit. Whatever it is, I cannot sit. If I sit, I shall lose the nerve, and I have walked a long way up to it. Verity drew the breath that her whole watchful life had taught her never to draw. There is no courtship. There never was. I came to this house 11 days ago to put my father's last work into your hands and be paid 8 guineas. And your son, who had told you a tale of a clever poor girl who would not have him for his title. A girl he invented out of air to keep you from marrying him to Lady Cybele. Your son saw me walk in wearing the very shape of his invention and breathed at me to faint and flee before you came. Up the stair. I would not faint. So I was caught. And you loved me across the room in 90 seconds. And you had not been happy in 3 years, and he could not bear to put you back into your blacks with his own hands, and so he begged me for 3 months of letting you believe it, and I, God forgive me, I said yes, and I have been lying to you every day since with my eyes open. Her voice did not break, though she had thought it would. That is the truth, Your Grace. I am a painter's daughter. I am owed 8 guineas, and I am not, and never was, the woman your son means to marry. He wrote to me yesterday to tell you himself tonight, and pay me off and end it cleanly. I have come instead to tell you in my own voice, because you deserve it in a true one, and because I could not let him write me out of my own ruin in his hand, and sign it Elsmere. The silence in the small saloon was complete. Far off through the walls the fiddles soared, and the dancers thudded, and the great gold lie of the evening went on assembling itself above their heads. The Dowager Duchess of Elsmere stood with her fan quite still in her ringed hand, and looked at Verity for a long time, and her dark eyes went bright, and Verity braced herself for the grief she had dreaded for a fortnight. The blacks going back on, the happiness she had stolen now stolen back. You foolish, the Dowager said at last, very low, brave, honest children. And she sat down, slowly, and pressed the closed fan to her lips exactly as her sister-in-law had pressed her knuckle to hers in the candlelight down the hall. And she began, not to weep, though her eyes ran, but to laugh, helplessly, soundlessly, with one hand pressed flat to the pearls at her breast. Your Grace, you think I did not know. The Dowager looked up, and the laughter and the tears stood in her face together. Verity, my son has not been able to lie to me since he was 4 years old, and broke the blue cessvers, and told me a footman did it, while the footman stood in the room. I knew within a week that there had been no 2 months of courtship. There were no letters. Child. No notes. No flowers. No flushed servants. None of the wreckage a young man in love leaves all over a house. I knew he had made you up. What I did not know, her voice caught, what I could not for the life of me make come right, was why the made-up girl kept coming back. Why he went 3 days running to Clerkenwell. Why he wrote to you at midnight. Oh yes, Banks tells me everything he has done since Tristan was in short coats. Why a man who invents a betrothal to be rid of one woman should spend a fortnight behaving exactly like a man who has fallen into a real one, and is too proud and too frightened to say so even to himself. Verity stood very still. He has not. He sat for a likeness. The Dowager rose again and took Verity's blackened hand in both her own, the way she had the first day. A man who has not held a pencil in 3 years, because the one who taught him is gone, sat down at your easel and let you paint him. Do you know what you were watching, you clever girl who reads everyone but yourself? You were watching my husband's son come back to life at a north window. I did not weep across that drawing room 3 days for a lie. Verity, I have buried a great deal of foolishness in my life. I would never have wept for a lie. I wept because for the first time since his father was taken from us I saw my boy seen, and it did not matter one straw to me whether the paper said betrothed, because the thing itself, the looking, the being looked at, that was real, and I have wanted it for him more than I have wanted my own breath. She pressed the hand hard. So, you have told me the truth. Now I shall tell you one. The question was never whether the engagement was true. The question, my darling, is only whether you will make it so. And that is not mine to answer, nor his. It is yours. The door opened. How affecting, said Lady Augusta. She stood in the doorway in her black purple silk, the curling feather, the attar of roses gone past its hour, and behind the hard bright face Verity could still see, like a glaze under a glaze, the woman who had pressed her knuckle to her mouth over an ivory miniature a quarter of an hour before. Augusta came in, unhurried, and sat down on the small table by the door, with 2 fingers. A folded paper Verity knew at once for what it was, a tradesman's hand, a signature, the colourman's account book made into a weapon. I came to fetch you both up, Augusta said. The room is full. My sister is to make her announcement. And I have here, one gloved finger touched the folded paper, the sworn word of one Josiah Tunney, colourman of Clerkenwell, that the famous betrothed of the Duke of Elsmere came to this house a fortnight since to collect 8 guineas for a miniature, and that no duke has ever once crossed his threshold. I had meant, she said, and her voice was perfectly steady. And only Verity, who had seen the candlelight, heard the thing trembling underneath it, to read it aloud at the foot of the stairs, at the height of the dancing, so that the fall should be as far and as public and as final as the height my sister insists on building. I have waited a fortnight for it. It is, I believe, the cruelest thing I have ever arranged, and I have arranged a great many. Augusta, the dowager's voice was iron. Be quiet, Honoria. I am not finished. Augusta did not look at her sister-in-law. She looked at Verity, and at the amber silk, and at the black under the nails of the hand the dowager still held. Read the line, Miss Crew. The top line. I should like you to read it before you decide what you think of me. Verity let go of the dowager's hand, and crossed to the table, and picked up the folded paper, and opened it. The colourman's hand, true enough. But the top line was not the colourman's. It was written across the head of the page, in a different hand entirely, high and hard, a cavalry charge gone unsteady at the end. In fresh ink, I withdraw this. I find I cannot use it. A. V. I have struck it through, Augusta said, and now the steadiness did break, by 1 degree, the width of a brush hair. Beneath, you will see I have struck the whole of Tunney's account through, twice, so that no one might read it after me. I drove to Clerkenwell to ruin you, child. I drove home, having watched you stand in your father's garret, with his gold on your shelf, and tell me 8 guineas were owed you still. Because it was the one true thing you had, and you would not let go of it even to save yourself. And I have not been able to put the picture down since. Her chin came up. I have buried 2 husbands, and I have outlived the decade my looks were worth. And I have made a study of liars, and I built my whole life on being cleverer than the love I could not have. And then a paint grinder's daughter looked at my nephew across a dinner table, after he defended her, and said to herself, plain as a sum, that is real. I saw you do it. You do not hide your face as well as you think, and I understood that you had found in 11 days the only thing I have wanted in 30 years, and I could not, in the end, be the one to put my heel through it. She stepped back from the table. There, that is my apology, Miss Crew, and it costs me the cruelest evening I ever planned, and a good deal of my opinion of myself, which I valued. You may make of it what you like. Verity looked at the struck-through page, and then at the hard, beautiful, unguarded woman in front of her, and she did the one thing no one in that house had ever done to Lady Augusta Verelst. She set the paper down gently, as a thing of worth, and she said, "Whose miniature were you holding, in the antechamber?" My father painted it. I knew his hand across the room. Augusta went white, and then, slowly, something in her face came loose that had been clenched a very long time. "My first husband," she said. Before the title, before the arithmetic. He laughed the way Tristan's father laughed. "Your father painted him the spring we married. I have carried it through 2 marriages and 40 years, and I take it out when I think myself unobserved, which is not often, for I am very seldom unobserved." She almost smiled. "You see everything, do you not? It is a hard gift. I should know. I have it too. It is the only book most people leave open, Verity said softly, and the door opened a third time, and Tristan Verel came in. He had been told nothing, and he saw everything. His mother's wet face, his aunt's loose one, Verity in the amber with the struck-through paper under her hand, and the air of a room in which a great deal had just happened in his absence. He stopped on the threshold, hatless, his cravat already loosed by the heat of the floor, and his grey eyes went to Verity and stayed. "You came," he said. "I wrote you not to come. You wrote me out of my own ruin and signed it with your house." Verity said, "I came to put my name back in it. I have told your mother the truth, Tristan, all of it. The feint, the bargain, the 3 months, the 8 guineas, the lie I have worn next to my skin for a fortnight. She knew already. She knew within a week. She is not in her blacks, she is laughing at the pair of us, and your aunt has struck through the only weapon she had against us and apologized, which I am told has not occurred in this family inside of living memory." She took a breath. "So there is no lie left to keep, Your Grace. It is all on the floor. Which means that whatever either of us says now, we say as ourselves, with nothing left to protect. And I find that is the only ground I have ever wanted to stand on with you, and I have been too much of a coward to ask for it. So I am asking now. Did you write that letter to save me, or to be rid of me? Tell me as Tristan. The house may keep silent." He crossed the room. He did not stop at the careful arm's length. He took both her blackened hands in his, the paint-pale callus pressing her knuckles, and he said, low and steady and entirely without charm, "To save you. Only ever to save you." And I told myself it was honor, and it was not honor. It was that I could not bear to stand in that ballroom and watch them take apart the one person who has ever looked at me and seen a man and not a roof. I would have given you £800 and let you go and called it kindness, and it would have been the most cowardly thing I ever did. Because the truth, Verity, since we are at last standing on it, is that somewhere in your father's garret, between the lampblack and the light on the thing, I stopped pretending to court you, and simply did, and I was too proud and too frightened to say it even inside my own head. His hands tightened. I do not want 3 months. I want the leaves to turn and turn and turn. I want to not know what to do with the quiet every evening for the rest of my life, because you have just left the room. I made you up to escape my mother. And then you walked in and were real, and you have been the only real thing in a year of paper. And I love you. There, the house is silent. It is only Tristan saying it. I love you. And I am asking you to make the lie true. Not for her. Not for the ball. For me, who has nothing left to offer you but a cracked orangery, and a hand that has forgotten how to draw, and a name you have already worn better than I do." The fiddles soared on, far away. The candles burned. Verity Crew stood in a room with the truth all over its floor and looked up at the man holding her ruined hands, and she felt the last hard-won instinct of her watchful life lay itself down at last. "You will have to mend the orangery," she said, and her voice was not steady at all, and she let it not be. "And sit for me until the likeness is finished, for I left it at the underpainting, and I do not leave work unfinished. It is the one thing my father would not forgive. And you will pay me 8 guineas, openly, as a tradesman is paid, before you give me anything else, because I will not begin a true thing on an unpaid debt." She drew a breath. "And then yes, Tristan, I will make it real. I have wanted to since you said lampblack and regret was your favorite color, and made me laugh in a garret where I had sworn off laughing. Heaven help us both." He laughed, the real one, short and ruined and astonished, and behind them the Dowager pressed her fan to her mouth and wept without shame at last. And Lady Augusta turned her face to the cold chimney-piece and stood very straight, and her gloved hand went once to the place over her heart where, Verity now knew, an ivory miniature of a man who laughed had ridden through 40 years and 2. marriages and one cruelty unspent. Well, said Augusta, to the marble, in a voice not quite her own. Someone had better go and tell Honoria's 1,000 candles that the announcement may proceed. It would appear, against all my arithmetic, to have become true. They went up together, the four of them, into the gold and the heat and the surf of the floor, and the Dowager Duchess of Elsmere stood at the head of her great staircase, and cried her son's betrothed aloud to the whole of London by name, Miss Verity Crew. And 1,000 candles threw their light up through the glass into the August dark. And not one soul in the room knew that the name had been a lie 11 days before, nor that the woman in amber had made it true with the only currency she had ever fully owned, which was the truth itself, spoken at last in her own voice. Lady Sybil Daundry danced the first with the Duke before he was given away, white muslin and a brave, kind face, and Verity saw the moment the girl understood she had been spared something, rather than denied it, and saw her smile become real. And later Lady Augusta stood at Verity's elbow and put down, with 2 fingers and the whole weight of her terrible reputation, 3 separate whispers about Clerkenwell before they could take a step, so that to question Miss Crew became, by the end of that evening, to quarrel with the most feared tongue in London, and no one quarrelled with Augusta twice. The leaves turned, in the end, the way Verity had been afraid to let them. They were married quietly from the Elsmere chapel before the first frost, and the 8 guineas were paid first, openly, into her blackened hand, before the settlements and the pearls and the cracked orangery deeds, because she had said they must be, and he had learned not to argue with the things she would not bend on. The miniature of the late Duke of Elsmere, her father's last work finished at his elbow, hangs now in the small saloon where the Dowager rests her feet, and beside it, smaller, in a frame her new daughter chose, hangs a young man with a laughing mouth that Augusta carried for 40 years and gave up at last to the light, because, she said, a thing that true should not be looked at, only when one is unobserved. And on a north-lit morning the following spring, in an orangery with its glass new mended, and the first green pressing at the panes, the Duke of Elsmere sat very still on a stool in his shirt-sleeves, while his wife ground a little black on a slab, lamp-black and a breath of indigo, the colour her father had named and caught, on a small square of ivory, not the Duke and not the house, but the light on the man. "Hold still," Verity said. "You move when you are moved." "I am always moved," said Tristan, "in this particular room by this particular woman, and you have only yourself to blame for it." And it was so dry and so true that she laughed before she could stop it, the laugh she no longer had to ration, and her brush left a stroke of lamp-black and regret across a coat she would have to paint twice now, and neither of them minded in the least, for the morning was warm, and the glass was mended, and the velvet box on the mantel had long since given up its secret, and there was, at last, all the time in the world to get the light exactly right. If this one warmed you, stay a while by the fire. Tell me in the comments the moment you knew Tristan was a goner, the lamp-black or the laugh. And if you'd like another candlelit hour of Regency hearts finding their way home, subscribe and pull your chair a little closer. There's always another story waiting for the kettle to boil.